Hey guys, we are back updating the power rankings for Survivor UK following the first week of episodes, the first two episodes of the season, and I'm going to be ranking the players based on how likely they are to win the game. Now, obviously, with this being a new production team and the first iteration of Survivor UK in over 20 years, it's going to be very hard to assess the edit here, where unlike Survivor US or Australian Survivor, we don't really have many trends to go off of in terms of how the show's going to be edited and how the winner is ultimately going to be edited here. And while I was tempted to just throw out the edit altogether and go off gameplay, sort of similar to what I did with Survivor SA, I did decide to still base it off edit as one, we don't necessarily know all of the game dynamics yet, so it'll be hard to base it purely off that. And two, I still believe that there will be some edgic involved here, where we do see some major characters emerging based off this first week, so I will be basing it off that, though obviously we should still be taking this all with a grain of salt, as ultimately we don't know the full extent of how the show is going to be presented. But with all that out of the way, there are 18 players to get into, and let's not waste any more time, let's get right into the video. So starting off at number 18, we have the first boot of the season, and here we have Richard. And it's a bit of a shame to see Richard go out here, where he did get a pretty big presence during the premiere here, where he got a match chat. He talks about what it takes given the challenges he's faced. He gets a decent amount of content, like talking about his tribe, talks about how he feels responsible for costing his tribe the challenge as he's the one to drop out. And that does seem to be a factor in why he was voted out, or at least that's based on how the show's presenting it, which is kind of dumb, where we did see him try to talk about taking out some of the more legitimately weak contenders in the future, people like Leilani, though that ultimately doesn't go through, and we even get his confessional right before Tribal, where he talks about how his worst case scenario is him going home first, only for him to go out first. So at the end of the day, it's a bit of a shame to see Richard go out here, but he's the first boot, and because of that, he is here at number 18. Now moving on to number 17, and we have the other boot from this batch of episodes, and here we have Sabrina. And Sabrina obviously had a pretty notable downfall here. Didn't get too much content in episode 1, like she talks about how confident her tribe is and how they're the best tribe ever. And then we do see her more in episode 2 with her like wanting to target Ashley due to her injury. We see her being pretty bossy around camp, which plays a factor in why she's taken out. Though at the same time, it is still a mostly split vote here, where people like a Hannah votes out Ashley with her, and even people like a Lee and a Pegleg don't vote her out as well. So it's not as if she had the consensus target here that Richard did. Though at the same time, like, she mostly did to herself, and it sort of brought me back to what she said in her own bio, where she talked about how she was worried about dulling her personality, and we saw that really play out here, where she was ultimately taken out due to her personality and due to her being so bossy. But obviously, she's out of the game now, which is why she's here at number 17. And with that, there are 16 players left in the game to talk about, and as usual, I'll be ranking them based on how likely they think they are to win, based off their edit and current game position. And obviously, like I said, it's going to be pretty hard to assess these, and I could very well see this shifting quite a bit in the weeks to come, but I'm just basing it off what I'm seeing right now. But at number 16, I did decide to go with Ren. And basically, the way that I decided to break this down is that the bottom tier is going to be people that just didn't get really much of anything across these first two episodes. And I feel like Ren has one of the quietest edits here, where she only gets a confessional during episode 1, where she talks about being nervous about the challenge and that she doesn't want to lose it. And then she literally gets 0 confessionals in episode 2. Now, she is shown being part of the Majority Alliance, which is a pro in a way, but the fact that she's gotten so little content so far just makes me feel not that great about her. Now, obviously, she could get a spike in the future, and through that, we could see her do better in the future. But again, for right now, with the very limited information that we have, I just don't feel that great about her, which is why she is here at number 16. Now moving on to number 15, and we have another player that realistically is probably in a good spot, but they've just been getting very little content, and here we have Matthew. And again, Matthew's a very similar situation. He actually gets 0 confessionals during episode 1, and in episode 2, like, we hear him talking about wanting to win the reward challenge, and that he'd be disappointed if he lost again, only for him to be disappointed, sure enough, after they lose the reward challenge. He talks about how the longest he's ever gone wearing the same pair of underwear is a few days. Again, very surface level stuff, nothing too crazy here. And I think the fact that he doesn't get really anything in the premiere is a pretty big knock for me, which is why he's here at number 15. Now moving on to number 14, and we have another player that pretty much got no content in the first episode, and here we have Rach. And Rach is another one who got no confessionals in episode 1. Episode 2 is where she picks up a little bit, like she talks about feeling good that they're on the winning tribe, how they were relieved they didn't have to go to the first tribal, only for them to go to the second one. She's the one that talks about being annoyed about Sabrina and how people seem very annoyed by her and how bossy she is. And obviously she wants to lead the charge to take out Sabrina, only for her to get votes herself at that tribal with Lee and Pegleg. So I feel like a lot of it felt pretty circumstantial, where it felt like the main reason she was getting content was because she was the one leading the charge against Sabrina, where outside of that she doesn't really get too much focus here, which is why I do have her here at number 14. Now moving on to number 13, and I actually had this person a couple spots higher initially. However, the more that I thought about it, I just don't feel that great about them. And here we have the other Rachel, and it's Rachel. Now, Rachel did have an okay-ish premiere, where she talks about needing everything to win, mental strength, physical strength, and a good social game, and that you're not going to win if no one likes you. But even outside of that, she doesn't really get too much here. Like, she gets a confessional about not knowing who to vote for, and that she'll need to base it on her gut, which ultimately leads to her voting out Richard here. And then in episode 2, she doesn't really get to follow up on that at all, which is a bit of a worry here, especially on a shorter season like this. So I am kind of worried about Rachel. The main reason I have her above these other people is that she at least got some content in the premiere, and I feel like she has at least some setup to a future storyline, but really I just don't feel that high about her right now, which is why she is here at number 13. Now moving on to number 12, and we have someone who, so far at least, I've been kind of disappointed by, and here we have Shai. And Shai has been, again, very underwhelming, where he was my winner pick coming into it. And to be fair, he does have a very solid premiere, or at least a big premiere, where he talks about his job and how he has the social skills and the physical ability, only to show him being at the bottom and him just rubbing a lot of people on his tribe the wrong way, which, again, coming into the season, feels like something that wasn't as likely, but obviously now it's just kind of underwhelming. Now, the reason I don't have him at the bottom is there is a chance he could turn around, where he does get this confessional in episode 2 about how he needs to take a step back and that he needs to not give people an excuse to vote for him, which, while we don't really see him doing much good, the fact that we don't really see him much in episode 2 does at least show that he's at least taking a step back. Though at the same time, like, I do still worry a lot about him. And while it's possible that he could be seen as his journey at it, where he does turn around, I still think there's a big chance that he's just a big character that's taken out the first opportunity. So I feel like for that reason, I can't have him any higher than number 12. Now moving on to number 11, and we have someone that I just wasn't entirely sure what to do with, and here we have Hannah. And Hannah's one I'm kind of conflicted on, where on one hand, I feel like there's definitely some good content here. She does talk about winning the challenge in episode 1, and then in episode 2, we see her establish her relationship with Christopher, and we have her talking about how if you're not building friendships, you're not playing the game right. And we even see her kind of sympathizing with Ashley with their injuries, though at the same time, she is still someone that's talking about challenge performance a lot, and she does ultimately vote on the wrong side of the votes here, not even voting with Christopher at this tribal here to take out Sabrina. So I do worry that this undercutting could be a knock against her, which is why I do have her this low on the list. But again, I still think there's some good content here. I still think there's some things that can lead to her doing well in the future. But again, for now, I have her here at number 11. Now moving on to number 10, and we have someone who I can very much see going either way. And here we have Ashley. Now, on one hand, Ashley is not in the best spot on her tribe right now, where she does have this injury that's holding her back. And considering how challenge-focused this cast seems to be, I do very much worry that that could lead to her being taken out sooner rather than later. But I also think the edit is kind of propping her up, where, again, she does get a confessional in episode 1. Episode 2, we do see her, like, being included in the Majority Alliance. We see people actively working to save her, people like a Christopher, which I do think is a boon to her credit. Though at the same time, like, considering the nature of this cast, I still worry about the real life, like, game elements to this. to where I could see her being taken out. So again, I'm kind of conflicted about her, but for now I did decide to leave her here at number 10. Now moving into number 9, and we have someone who is largely doing how I'm expecting them to do, and here we have Lee. Now, Lee is probably one of the bigger characters in the edit right now, where he does get an intro package. He's actually the first to get his intro package, talking about him being a boxer, how he thinks El Champo will be his nickname, and that he is defined by challenges above everything else, which again, he's not the only one to do this, but he is definitely one of the bigger advocates for that. And we also see him like being one of the advocates to worry about Ashley's injury, which then leads into Tribal, where he votes for Rach, probably under the assumption that Rach was leading the charge against Sabrina. So he is technically on the outs right now, as he did not vote in that majority group there. So I do worry about his pure game position right now, but he is still someone who is a relatively big character, though admittedly a bit too big to where if this is going to be like a general reality TV edit, I don't really see how this translates to a win, where I think at best he'll probably just be a big character, though we'll have to see how the show goes moving forward. But for now, I think number 9 is a good spot for him. Now moving on to number 8, and we have someone who is kind of interesting in that they also had a pretty big premiere, but they actually got very little content in episode 2, and here we have Lawrence. And Lawrence had a pretty big premiere here where he gets the first confessional of the season, talking about how the game is a lesson in humility, referring to the fact that he's stripped of all luxuries of life. He talks about how it's a hostile environment, how he gets his intro package, talking about how he runs a business and that he's worked in 11 countries and that he's obsessed with horses and yet he thinks Survivor will be one of the greatest challenges he's faced. Again, all stuff setting him up, but then he just doesn't get much in episode 2. I feel like he's sort of similar to Lee in that he's going to be a relatively big character, but someone that's at least better insulated within the game, to where Lawrence at least seems to be more in the majority right now based off his voting record. And I think even beyond that, I feel like Lawrence is someone I just naturally have a bit more confidence in right now, which is why I have him here at number 8. Now moving on to number 7, and I'm actually a little surprised this person is this high, but I actually feel like this person's edit isn't too bad, and here we have Leilani. And Leilani actually has a pretty interesting edit here. Like, she talks about in episode 1 how she knows she has a target on her back and that she wouldn't want to leave so early. She's talking about potentially targeting Shai early on, only for her to change her mind after Shai does well in the challenge, where she does talk about how Richard is now on the block. She talks about being a fighter and that she'll fight until she's dead, which I feel like is pretty good there. And then we even get a bit more content in her episode 2 in that she feels like they can break their losing streak by going as a team rather than 1v1, and that they'll take any form of comfort or relief, only for them to lose the reward challenge. But I feel like the fact that Leilani is getting this edit so far is actually pretty solid in my view. I feel like she's definitely being propped up more than I expected, though she's still not a top contender for me right now, which is why she's here at number 7. Now moving on to number 6, and I'm sure some people have this person near the top of their power rankings. However, while this person seems to be a pretty big character, I also think they're just going to be a big character taken out along the way. And here we have Doug. And Doug so far has gotten a pretty solid edit. Like, he talks about how fire is everything in this game during the premiere and that it provides people with food. During episode 2, he's kind of shown being like an asset to his tribe, where he wants to take on Nathan, the reward challenge. He gets his intro package talking about how Survivor's like fishing and that he needs to be patient, but if he keeps trying, he'll land a beauty. And sure enough, that's followed up upon after the reward challenge where they win fishing gears, so that's something. And he's also shown being kind of in the middle during the tribal, where he is shown like being on the Ashley side, but also working with Sabrina, telling her that she's the target there. And then he ultimately votes out Sabrina, again siding with that Ashley side of things. So overall, like, it's a pretty solid edit so far, and I feel like he's definitely going to be a major character across the season. But again, he kind of reminds me about these other big character edits that we've seen on Survivor US and even on Australian Survivor, which is why I do have him here at number 6. Now moving on to number 5, and I can't believe this person is this high. However, the edit seems to be on their side, all things considered. But here we have Pegleg. And Pegleg has been getting a very interesting edit so far. Now, admittedly, his episode 2 is kind of bad, where he does ultimately side with the wrong group there. He is voting in the minority there, loses Sabrina here, which is not great. But I feel like outside of that, like the edit's like very sympathetic towards him, like where he does talk about on the match chat in episode 1 that people will know each other and find their feet. People are already checking each other out. He talks about how the other tribe must be demoralized after losing the challenge, but since they won, it's their problem, not his. He gets his intro package, talking about how people make assumptions about him and that they think he's not that big of a threat. He may be an old man, but he has the mind of a young person. His mind and resilience will take him to the end. Again, all this is pretty good, and I feel like he is another one being set up to be a pretty major character across the season here. And you can even argue that him not getting much content in episode 2 is to shield him from him not voting in the majority there. So I think to that end, like Peg like could be someone that could be like a big sympathetic character across the season. But again, I feel like compared to the top 4, he's not the person I feel the most confident about right now, which is why he is here at number 5. Now moving on to number 4, and kind of similar to Pegleg, this is another player that I can't believe is being presented the way that they are, but here we have Jess. And I feel like Jess is someone who, despite admitting in their interview that they didn't know that the show had a psychological component to it, she seems to be doing okay right now, where again she does get a decent amount of content talking about how she's not thinking about not having luxuries. She is the one to talk about how Shai is being bossy around camp. Talks about how this is the hardest thing she's done, which leads into her intro package about how she talks about being a model and that she's just here for the experience, but also wants the money, which I found pretty funny there. She talks about how going home first isn't an option, so she wants to prove to her tribe that she has what it takes. And that later on, like she talks about how the vote is between Shai and Leilani, which again is a bit of a knock considering the vote eventually falls onto Richard, which is part of the reason why I don't have her higher. But she still gets some content in episode 2 talking about how she's excited that they finally have fire and that they get to eat. She looks forward to winning chocolate, and that after they win the immunity challenge, she's excited that they don't have to go back to tribal. Again, like it's not a perfect edit for sure, but I still feel like the edit is mostly propping her up. And I feel like she is, again, being said to be one of the major characters across the season, which is why I have her here at number 4. Now moving on to number 3, and we have a player that I also find pretty impressive considering how they are right now. And here we have Nathan. And I feel like Nathan's another one of these big characters. Again, he gets to talk a lot about how he is a physical specimen, that he loves winning physical challenges. And he also talks about him thinking about his kids when he wants to give up. Again, all that's pretty good. But even beyond that, he gets some strategic content as well, where he is shown establishing his relationship with Tanook, how they seem to be a duo right now, but that he doesn't want to make it too obvious to the rest of the tribe. Again, all of it's pretty good stuff, all things considered. And I feel like out of these players to get really big edits across these first 2 episodes, I feel like Nathan is probably the one that I feel the best about. Though I feel like the top 2 players are a bit more subdued in their edits up to this point, which is why I leave them here at number 3. Now moving on to number 2, and I feel like these top 2 are people that have gotten mostly positive edits up to this point and have plenty of things going on, but are under the radar enough to where I could see them popping off later, whereas the big characters that we talked about earlier could be people that peak a bit too early and are eventually taken out. But number 2, I did decide to go with Tanook. And I feel like Tanook is someone who is in a very solid spot right now. Again, she has the relationship with Nathan, which I feel like is pretty good. But even beyond that, she gets some pretty good confessionals here where she talks about wanting to target Shai for being annoying, but he did well in the challenge, so he's off the table. And then she talks about voting for Richard, and if he stays, then she's screwed. Sure enough, it leads to Richard being voted out. And then even beyond that, like we see the relationship with Tanook being set up. In episode 2, she talks about how she feels bad for Richard going home. That was the best thing for the tribe, and that she feels like Shai is panicking at this point. So again, it's still a mostly solid edit here. Nothing too out of the ordinary here. But again, I feel like she is someone that could easily pop off later given her relationship with Nathan. I feel like she is still someone who has enough setup for a potential like winner trajectory down the road, which is why I have her here at number 2. And now, at number 1, the person I believe is the most likely to win Survivor UK right now is Christopher. And I feel like Christopher is kind of similar to Tanook in that he's getting the strategic content of him like talking about the importance of keeping a poker face, and that he is technically seen as the one building this majority alliance. But I still feel like he's someone that hasn't gotten as much exposure compared to people like a Nathan, people like a Lee, even people like a Peg Leg, for instance, to where I could still see him being a major character down the road, but not one that's peaking too early. And I feel like for me, that was the main difference here. Again, I understand that people will disagree with a lot of these rankings here. Like, I feel like a lot of this is just based off gut right now and just very general things, where I feel like in future weeks, I feel like it'll start to become more clear over who will eventually win here. But I feel like for now, I feel like Christopher is the one who's gotten a consistent enough presence across the first 2 episodes while still being shown to be like a competent strategic player that leaves him here at number 1. And there we go, that'll do it for this week's video. If you like this content, be sure to like and subscribe, really helps out the channel. And I'll be back again next week to update the power rankings again, so you can see tuned for that. I'm covering a whole bunch of shows right now, such as Survivor 45, Big Brother 25, Amazing Race 35, and obviously this show, so you can expect weekly power rankings of that. I'm on Patreon now, so if you want to consider supporting the channel, you can do so by clicking the link in the description. And if you haven't already, you can also join the Discord server by clicking the link in the description. There's a lot of stuff coming your way, but for now, that's the video. See ya.